Hey, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening. Welcome to today's Ask the Expert session. I'm Rob Mossy, Senior Director of Product Marketing, and today's session is focused on cyber resilience in action, ensuring business continuity after an attack. My guest today is Joe Spellmeyer. He's part of the Index Engines team, and as the IBM Alliance Manager, he is responsible for our worldwide OEM channel that goes through IBM. He owns our go-to-market strategy with them, and he plans. This is a rapidly growing segment for us here at Index Engines. And what his job includes is in aligning our sales teams here at Index Engines, excuse me, with our counterparts at IBM and coordinating our product strategies with IBM product management and serves as our spokesperson to our IBM counterparts. So he's essentially our leader with IBM. It's great to have him here. Uh, Prior to Index Engines, he was an IBMer of 5 years, and he loves working with what he considers as the nexus of a technology stalwart, really kind of helping them in a category defining upstart position, which is CyberSense over in their product categories. So he joined Index Engines because of the enthusiasm that the people have here. In case that's not obvious, we are all extremely enthusiastic about CyberSense and Index Engines in general. Um, on a personal note, you can probably see Joe. I run into him at the gym when we're traveling together, but he also likes to run, play golf, tennis, and just be outdoors. So he does. Here's a little known fact about Joe. He owns a number of golf bags, but he's working on filling each one of those golf bags with a particular set of clubs. So he's limited in that capacity. But hopefully we'll be able to fix that for you. Um, One logistical note for this meeting, if you do have a question, please put it into the Q&A section. We are not monitoring the chat. Once again, throw your questions into the Q&A section, and we'll be able to get to those at some point during the presentation. Again, we are not monitoring the chat. So without further ado, Joe, let's get rolling here.
Let's do
So
it.
in today's digital landscape, there's a lot of hidden costs of ransomware attacks. Uh, and these costs are becoming increasingly more apparent. High profile incidents highlight the severe financial, operational, and reputational impacts of such attacks. And these examples underscore the importance of investing in robust cybersecurity measures and having a comprehensive response plan in place in order to be able to get oneself out from underneath one of these attacks. But what it also really highlights is the need to be prepared. Organizations have to be prepared to not only defend against an attack, but to recover. And recovery is a critical component when these incidents occur. So this discussion with Joe today is going to explore the post-detonation impact of a cyber attack. And it's going to then touch on four key components, which I'm going to let Joe talk about, of cyber resiliency that IT and security teams need to have in place. So as Joe touches on these components, uh, this is going to help identify how organizations can minimize their downtime, protect against critical data loss, and build confidence in their ability to recover from a cyber attack. So, Joe, first question for you of the day. You ready?
All right, lay it on me.
All right. So it seems that cyber attacks are happening weekly, if not even daily. Uh, I've actually seen statistics that show a cyber attack happens every 38 seconds. We actually tout that in some of our presentations. Um,
Mhm.
Are there any newsworthy attacks that really stick out in your mind that are worth mentioning, just to kind of help set the stage here today for our discussion?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, Rob. That's a great question. 2024, new year now, but this past year was a busy year for cyber criminals, and this is a trend we're seeing increasingly, right? Every year there are more attacks, there are more attack vectors, there are more tactics that bad actors are deploying in their attempts to get into and corrupt customer environments. So last year was no different. 2024 was one of the biggest years we've seen in recent history for cyber attacks. Just a couple of high profile ones. I mean, there was Loan Depot, which occurred last year. They were breached, and that ransomware attack led to a 3 week recovery period, caused a quarterly loss of $70 million. I think a $25 million class action lawsuit, $41 million in recovery costs. So it's not just the cost of having your business down, although that can be devastating for some businesses, as we'll talk about. It's the cost of the legal ramifications and the compliance ramifications after the fact. Change Healthcare was another one. That was a hugely disruptive healthcare attack across the U.S. And this is an industry that we're spending a lot of our time and attention on helping is healthcare because of just the cost and the severity of if those business critical systems like Epic, like their EMRs, go down. I think Change Healthcare, the response costs were over nearly $2.5 billion. I think as of last I heard in Q4 of last year, they still had not fully recovered, which is devastating to imagine
Yeah,
the impact of that.
that's always amazing to me, and I know that stat was I believe from Q4 of last year, but it's still very amazing that they have not had that ability to fully recover from such an attack.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, every day that goes on, it has effects on patient care. It has effects on revenue, especially the
Right.
ability to not do things like elective surgeries and skinny down operations to really bare bones. Uh, Another example last year was CDK. I know that's one that you know a little something about.
Yeah.
They faced a $25 million ransom demand. And of course, those ransom demands are fickle beasts, right? You pay them, and then you never know if you're gonna the bad actors are going to reinfect your environment, or if you try not to, and you're not confident that you're restoring from clean copies, which is something I know we'll talk about later. You see instances where that ransom demand goes up even higher. So
Right.
I think there were something like 15,000 customers affected by that CDK one.
There was. I actually got to speak to one of them on a popular auto mile in the North Bay of the Bay Area. Uh,
Oh wow.
the dealer had to go to an all paper had to go to all paper transactions. However, there were other customers on the same auto mile. They had to shut down completely. So, at least this particular car dealer had the ability to pivot, and they had a, sort of a backup plan in play, plan B, if you will. But for the other dealers, they said it was chaos, and they
Yeah.
had to they shut their doors. They literally closed down for 2 weeks out of a month. So, the revenue impact there for their customers wasn't necessarily just CDK; it was their customers were actually impacted because of this the outage that the ransomware attack caused.
Yeah, and that's something that a lot of folks I think don't sufficiently consider when you're talking about these things in the abstract. It's not just the effect of on your business; it's the effect on your customer's business, and all the way that systems are so intertwined these days. Uh, as far as a recovery and restoration perspective, you have to be able to prove that your environment is back up and running, that it's free of bad
Yeah,
actors before other companies whose systems are talking to yours will let you back onto their networks. So those
right.
those kind of second and third order effects are something that are often underestimated. One other
Yeah,
recent example that I always like to talk about because uh, it wasn't last year, but I'll tell you why I like to talk about it. Of course, was the MGM Resorts attack. That was over $100 million in recovery costs. And that one strikes particularly close to home for me, not for the reasons that people are thinking, MGM Resorts, but because, as you know, and you mentioned, I work closely with IBM and I lead our OEM partnership with them. IBM Tech Exchange was actually happening, one of their largest conferences during that attack. So when I talk to IBMers and I talk about this particular attack, it's one that really resonates with them because they were there, they were locked out of their rooms, they were unable to use any of the facilities or amenities. So they lived it. They saw that revenue impact and that customer service impact from
Yeah.
ground zero.
And I think too, I'm sure there's some others out there, but $110 million in recovery costs is is insane. I mean,
Yeah,
that's revenues for a medium-sized business when you really think about it. So, and just literally in one category of recovery, those costs are significant, and it doesn't even address the other damage that was done, whether it be to customers or lost revenue, et cetera. So a really interesting case there. But so these examples, these are great examples, Joe. I appreciate you kind of going through those a little bit. Uh, they're definitely a stark reminder of the hidden costs associated with ransomware attacks, whether you have to pivot and go to paper or whether you have lost revenue. All these things are operational downtime, different plans, different go-to-market routes that you have to take in order to maintain some form of continuity. um, Not to mention any potential data loss,
yeah,
or any potential data exfiltration of where there's a breach that happens on the side of one of these particular attacks. But the impact can definitely be far-reaching and long-lasting, as Change Healthcare is definitely a case in point on the long-lasting part. But it's
yeah,
critical to invest in robust cybersecurity, and that's really why we're here today, Joe, is to talk about those particular investments and how those investments can ultimately help customers. Um, Not necessarily avoid, but enable to react correctly to a cyber attack, a ransomware attack in particular. So, Joe, how can organizations ensure that their data protection strategies, right? Let's focus on data protection here, are robust enough to support quick recovery from failures, and not only failures, but from ransomware attacks, from data loss incidents. What are some of the best practices?
yeah. That's a great question. There's all sorts of recommendations out there for best practices or things to consider. When I talk to customers, one of the things that I always harken back to and a way of really assessing your preparedness is what we talk about at Index Engines as our four pillars of resiliency or four pillars of a smart recovery. And that really boils down to a couple of things, four things, obviously. First and foremost is data protection. Do you have copies of your data? Ideally, are those copies immutable, right? Whether we're talking backups or snapshots, whatever it might be, the first thing when bad actors get into your environment, they're going to look to do is get into your backups, right? Start to affect those so that, well, as we talked about earlier, if you try to restore from them, that they're able to still reinfect your environment. So having data protection, having copies of your data, ensuring that those copies are immutable is critical. You need to have somewhere to recover to, right? A clean room, an air-gapped environment, somewhere that you know when these events happen that that you have an alternative environment you can fail over to. And really, where index engines and our technology, CyberSense, is particularly key, is having validated data integrity. It's not enough uh, to have copies of your data. It's not enough to know what to do with that data and have somewhere to restore it to if you're not sure that it's clean. We talked earlier about the risk of reinfection. We've seen customer stories where customers have been hit with a ransomware attack. They said, that's all right, we have backups, we'll go and restore from our backups, without realizing that they were restoring dormant executables that ended up being reinfecting their environment. And then when they saw those ransoms, those demands increase time and time again. So ensuring that you're restoring something that has validated data integrity and it's clear of any of those dormant executables so you can recover once is critical. And then obviously preparedness, right? Continuously testing, making sure that it's not enough, again, just to know that you have backups of your data, that you have somewhere you can recover to, and that data is clean. If when an event happens, you don't know how to respond. So having red books, having those red books not be stored on your primary storage arrays, but physically printed red books the old-fashioned way. Having a
Right.
plan and everyone knowing the responsibility of who's who and who's going to do what is really really critical. So that's one way that we coach our customers and our clients on how to prepare. There's also other frameworks that are out there as well. We see things like the NIST framework, where it boils down to identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, and then establishing governance over all of that. So those are a couple of frameworks you can use to evaluate.
Right. Right. And there's certain aspects of that NIST framework that really apply very much, to the recovery aspect, both respond, really in the respond category as well as the recovery category. So,
And it's critical that you check whether it's NIST or whether it's our four pillars. It's really important to check
right.
all of those boxes, right? And that's
Absolutely.
one
Yeah.
area that some of our partners, obviously I mentioned I work closely with our IBM, our IBM channel. Partners like IBM have their security and resilience assessment. So when you talk about, what the question being, how do we know we're doing everything right? You can bring in a partner like IBM to conduct an assessment. I think Dell, has one as well, where they will do an assessment and see how you compare against these frameworks. Make sure that you're checking all the boxes you need to. Sometimes it just takes a third party to come in and identify those gaps.
That's great. You touched on one thing in those four pillars that I want to dive into a little bit more on, and that's kind of the concept of a safe recovery environment, right? Whether it be a clean room or immutable backups, um, air gapping, et cetera. How do those really play into the recovery process? And maybe share an example of how these environments have been successfully implemented and
Yeah,
effectively.
yeah, yeah. It boils down really first and foremost to when these events occur. Again, it's an adage that might seem tired at this point, but it really is not if, but when. When these
Right.
events occur, how do you know that you have an environment that you can go to that is clean, right? When bad actors get into your environment, you don't know immediately. Maybe you know something's wrong. You know that there's corruption. You know that there's a ransom that's being demanded, but you don't know where they are. You don't know what caused it. You don't
Mhm.
immediately have a lot of that forensic reporting. Obviously, that's some of the stuff that CyberSense and our technology partners like IBM, Dell, and Infinidat can help with. But you need somewhere to go to in the meantime. And you need somewhere to take those copies of your data and go and validate. All right, these are clean. We can actually restore from these without risking reinfecting our environment again. So having that air gap systems to isolate your critical data access from your main network is really important. There's also compliance requirements around this. Certain insurance providers and three-letter agencies will require that you have some sort of backup network, some sort of clean room to fail
Right.
over to. So there's a couple of ways that customers can go about that. There's obviously clean room solutions out there. There's also ways of building your own. I know of one large healthcare system that one of our partners worked with that used a combination of our technology along with some of their replication technology to build their own clean room for restoring their epic environments again if and when these attacks occur.
Mhm. And you mentioned the compliance aspect as well, and I think that kind of goes a little bit further back into our conversation of some of the additional costs, right? There's definitely a cost for not meeting, a particular compliance regulation, uh, especially when it comes to the protection of data and potential loss of said data. So you can add that one as well to some of those hidden costs of a ransomware attack if you're not well prepared. Um,
Yeah, yeah, and
yeah,
and on top of that, it's you have to remember too that when it comes to the regulations, when it comes to the intervention of whether it's police departments, FBI, three-letter
yeah,
agencies, and whatnot, insurance as well. It's not always up to you if, when, and how you recover, right? There are regulatory considerations that three-letter agencies will come in and say, well, we need to make sure before you recover that you have somewhere that you can recover to, that you have
Yes.
clean data. That we can do forensic reporting on the affected systems so that we can understand who got in, how, and what data is being exposed, and do the appropriate reporting on that. So there really are a lot of parties that are invested. It's really not as simple as, oh, we have our way of doing things, and we'll be okay. You have to make sure you're
Right.
checking all those boxes.
So speaking of our way of doing things, so how does AI powered detection like what we have in CyberSense really enhance data integrity rather uh, during recovery efforts? And let's just touch on some of these key benefits that CyberSense and AI powered detection can really bring uh, to help meet some of the challenges uh, that some of these customers are really experiencing, and really kind of bringing it into the fold, if you will, into a cyber security strategy.
Yeah, yeah, that's another good question. I have I come from a background of working at IBM in the data and AI space, so I have something of a love hate relationship with the term AI. It's again, you talk about adages that are tired. It's become such a prominent term in marketing that it can be a double edged sword of, when we talk about the powerful AI behind CyberSense, it's hard to differentiate, what we do versus what a lot of other folks that are touting AI as a marketing term are doing. Really though, at the end of the day, when people, for those who understand the value add of CyberSense, understand the value add of content level indexing as opposed to any of the other scanning technologies out there, uh, where AI fits in, as far as I'm concerned, is if you're not using AI, you are beholden to simpler, more crude methods of detecting whether it's ransomware, malware, etc. So you're looking at things like signature scanning, right? It's simply scanning a data store and looking to see if, or a file system, looking to see if there is a signature of no malware in there. There's no intelligence behind that. Same with techniques like threshold monitoring, right? Checking to see how quickly data is changing in an environment. And if it's changing really fast, faster than usual, then maybe it's malware. Again, it's relatively primitive. And the same can be said when we do metadata analytics, and there's certainly value behind that. I don't mean to
Yeah.
disparage metadata analysis, but if you're just looking at the metadata and saying, are there crazy spikes in things like Shannon entropy or compression rates, you're
Hmm.
only getting a portion of the picture. And that's where AI fits in. You need to have that level of intelligence. So not only do you need to be looking at the content the way that CyberSense is doing it, you need to be looking at it and understanding what are we looking for, and then cross-referencing that with, this is not just corruption, but it's corruption that's indicative of ransomware. And that's where CyberSense's value is really, really differentiated, right? We've trained our AI on thousands of variants of ransomware, not just looking at the metadata, not just looking at how quickly it changes the overall amount of data, but actually looking at the bits and bytes of that data structure and understanding how does ransomware behave. And because we have that intelligence that's learned how ransomware behaves when it's active in data, when in customer environments and databases and file systems, we can then not just observe that there's corruption happening, but we can say, hey, this corruption might be indicative of ransomware. And really what
Yeah.
that's valuable for is mitigating, not just being accurate in detection, it's mitigating false positives. Because everyone who's implemented a security or resiliency solution knows that with false positives comes alert fatigue, and then next thing you know, you're
Hmm.
not following up on those alerts. So it's not just
Right.
enough to look at the bits and bytes and say there's corruption here. You need to know this corruption is indicative of ransomware, and that's really where that intelligence fits in.
Yeah, and I think one of the benefits, just since we are looking at that behavioral aspect of how ransomware really works and how it affects each and every file, each and every database page, et cetera, we're able to have a much better understanding to even look at the behavioral aspects of new variants, and things that may not even have a signature associated with them because of the constant generation of new variants that are out on the market. That said, those variants tend to only they're limited in what they can do to data. And so that's one of the thing I think one of the little hidden benefits of CyberSense from the behavioral aspect is that we can almost stay ahead because we're looking for that behavioral aspect of what ransomware actually does to data.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I think of it almost as like the flu, right? How many variants of the flu are there? We try to inoculate against as many of them as possible. But at the end of the day, if you're looking for variants of the flu, there's going to be some that you miss. But
yeah,
as someone who had the flu recently, you're not going to miss the fever. And if we're looking at the data, we're looking at the fever. There's only so many ways, like you said, that data can behave, and we will detect
yeah.
that.
All right, Joe, last question for you. So
All right.
let's talk about regular testing, right? Why is that so important? And just, preparedness, right? I'll go to the old Boy Scout adage, right? Be prepared. Um,
Mhm.
what steps can organizations take to really ensure that their recovery plans uh, are effective and that their employees are well trained and ready to respond in the face of an attack?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I talked a little bit earlier about assessments, like Dell has their resiliency assessment, IBM has their SARA. Those are certainly important for evaluating in the abstract level what your plan is and what technologies and safeguards you have in place to protect against and respond against these attacks. But I go. You talked about your old adage of the Boy Scout mantra. I like the Mike Tyson quote, right? Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. It's easy to
Yeah, exactly.
talk about plans and say, oh, we have all these tools. We had this third party come off and validate that our plan is ready to go. We're ready for this if this happens. That's easy to say, but it's another thing to actually execute on it. And that's where the importance of actually testing those red books, not just auditing them, but going through and simulating what happens in the event of a ransomware attack, who's going to do what, are we actually prepared? And when you get through and actually go through those reps and get that practice in, you start to identify gaps that you never knew you had.
Yeah.
I mentioned this, I alluded to this earlier, but I heard of a customer recently who had a lot of things right. They had backups of their data. They had a clean room set up. They had red books. They were hit by a ransomware attack. It came in one day. All the lights were flashing. They were getting the warning screens, and they went to review the red book and figure out how they respond. The red book was stored on their storage array that was hit from the ransomware attack. There was no physical copy of it. You would think, you know, that you have a plan, you're prepared, and you have a red book ready to go. But it's things like that that just they sneak up on you. You wouldn't have thought of that maybe. You wouldn't have thought that the bad actors would have been able to lock down your red books, but they do. So those are the kind of
Right.
things that emerge when you go through a simulation, when you go through that practice that you otherwise might not have anticipated.
Great. Yeah, I love the Tyson reference. That's fantastic. Um, so I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up here. Joe, thank you so much for being here today. We've talked about a lot. We've talked about the impact of ransomware, and we've really touched on kind of what we consider to be these four key pillars, right? First and foremost is data protection, someplace safe to recover to, validated data integrity, which, this is where we come in from the CyberSense perspective. And then obviously everything's going to plan until you get punched in the face concept of being prepared. And so I think, the combination of those four key aspects really, is going to help organizations reduce that potential downtime, minimize any potential data loss, and really enhance recovery times. And when you look at those key examples that we talked about, you take into consideration Change Healthcare, to this date, still not fully recovered. So, very critical, very costly, to be working on a recovery for this length of a particular time of time. So with that, Joe, I can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your day to be here today. I did check the questions and answers, and it looks like we're clear today of
All
Q&A.
right.
If you do have questions, please go ahead and put them in there. We'll answer those offline. But again, thanks for joining us today, Joe. And that's it for this month's installment of Ask the Experts from Index Engines. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much for having me, Rob. Y'all take care.